Arzu Çöltekin did her PhD at the Helsinki University of Technology in 2006. And after being senior lecturer at the University of Zurich from 2007 to 2019, she is, as of early 2019, Professor of Human-Computer Interaction and Extended Reality at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, northwestern Switzerland. She focused primarily on information science, visual analytics, virtual augmented reality, and human-computer interactions. And also of interest, Arzu Çöltekin is the Zurich chapter lead of the Turkish Women International Network, a network for professional women, and gave a very interesting talk, which can be found online for the TED Global talk in 2013, entitled Defying Stereotypes of Turkish Women in Turkey. And she will now give a talk entitled Illusion and Exclusion of Talent.
Hi, thank you everybody. Thank you very much, Andreas, for that wonderful interaction. I was wondering why I'm exactly here, because I don't actually have a hat for any kind of gender representation. I don't hold a particular board position or represent an organization. I'm an individual, but I happen to speak a couple of times publicly. I also gave a Women in Science talk in Ignite Zurich, and I thought maybe one of those things got me in your radar. In any case, today we will talk about illusions, and I mean literally and figuratively about our illusions, about what we think is or what we associate with certain objects, certain optical illusions, certain people. So I'll walk you through that. Already at the chapter slide, you can see this famous illusion of Ebbinghaus circle. You can see the pink circle on the left here is actually the same size as the pink circle on the right. And this is affected by what it's round. So it's not about actual perceptual signal, but somehow your mind correcting something for you. So that said, I'll dive, yeah, there it is. It's a bit slow in the slide progression, but we will get there. So a lot of this has been said already by Andreas, so I'm not going to repeat. I have grown up in Turkey. I have done my undergrad and master's degrees there, and it was all in engineering, geographic information science. So eventually I went to Finland for a PhD, and then I ended up going to a couple of other places in between, short stays in Netherlands, Canada, sometimes after I came to Zurich, I also went to Melbourne, and I go to Harvard sometimes for a couple of exchanges. So stuff that I do is not really anything to do with gender. I don't understand the politics and the sociology of it except as a lay person. But I understand visual illusions because I study visualization, and I study vision to inform how to design and make visualizations better, whether people see, what they don't see, attention, and therefore in one project also illusions. One other kind of odd title about me is that apparently I'm the first woman to earn a PhD in photogrammetry in Finland. It's an obscure little field, but nonetheless, there's been quite a few other professors of photogrammetry when I was studying. It's a branch of computer vision, but it's focused on geospatial topics. So this has been stated to me when I got this. It's one of the points where I was thinking, okay, that's kind of interesting with this woman in technology or woman in science. And I got sometimes invited into giving these talks about women in Turkey. It's not because I'm qualified, but I have firsthand experience. So one of the sort of funny graphs that is already about gender is it's an interactive graph. You can discover it yourself. But what I thought was interesting is here, if you look at the best place in the world to be a working woman, Finland kind of tops it based on multiple parameters, and Turkey is down here, clustered a little bit with Switzerland, which is sort of interesting that a Turkish woman would go to Finland and get a PhD degree as the first person in that field, which comes to show that even our best options may not have been having women in science and technology for that long. So certain fields still didn't have a woman with a PhD by 2006 or so. So let's dive into the illusions business. The first illusion I want to share with you is called hollow mask. So this is a mask that you're looking at. It's not the kind of masks we are wearing these days, but imagine more a festival type of mask that you would put on your face. I'll play an animation, hopefully it will work. So this mask is rotating, and now you're looking at the mask from behind. And I continue, the mask rotates again. Now you are looking at it from front. Now what's happening is that I can make that play once more. When you look at the mask from behind, you're supposed to see it hollow. The nose is supposed to go kind of convex, right? But it doesn't work that way. My mind corrects for it, and nearly 99.9% of the people will always correct for it. So the nose, you've seen a million times in your life. Your mind knows that they are convex shapes. That's how faces look. And it categorizes that information and stores it in the back of your brain. And instead of processing the perceptual signal, it processes this stored category. So I see a nose that looks like a nose, it must be convex, so I correct it for you. So this is a lot of the time how the illusions work. It's called a prior or an assumption by your mind. The mind, in essence, is a statistical machine, and it silently learns about things. This also happens with this 3D perception with terrain. So since this is a geoscience community, I thought I'd share something from my work with you. So here, for example, this is a satellite image that's served in a map provider, and you can find plenty of these around. We have done a lot of little surveys to see how common this is. It's extremely common. So if you look at this particular valley that I'm highlighting, and I'm saying valley because look at the vegetation. I mean, there's a river running here. It has to be a valley, but perceptually, it appears as a ridge to majority of people. We also looked at the prevalence of this. Some people can work around this by using image interpretation, looking at the snow, looking at the vegetation, looking at the terrain features, but majority, a very good 80% or so, will see this as a ridge. And this is because the shadows are in the southern slopes. And this is northern slopes, sorry, this is not supposed to happen. We usually look at the maps north up, and usually the up has the light. So I'm going to explain it a little bit more. If you rotate this image and put the shadows down, again on the southern slopes, the spatial relationships are restored and the valley looks more like a valley now. And this is called the light from above prior. And this is because your mind knows that the sun is always above, ceiling light is above, and your reading light is above. It's very rare that we experience light from below, which is a known phenomenon in psychology. It has been shown in multiple studies with very abstract shapes, but it also happens in terrain. So what is interesting here is that it, again, is like this kind of silent statistics, and for many visual illusions, it works in this sense. It's also called an overhead illumination bias, and the word bias already comes in, and this is what we will talk about in the next few slides about our biases towards humans, not only for the visual illusions. So what you're looking at in terms of images here is that this terrain, now we remove the texture, we remove the photographic information, so you don't see the river, you don't see the snow, you don't see the vegetation to indicate that this is a valley. So we would ask people, is this form, ABC, is a valley, or is this a ridge? And they could rate from clearly a valley to clearly a ridge. So it's a scale. And this is illuminated from the north. So this is 337.5 degrees, which is slightly left of north. And a valley looks like a valley in this case. You take the same terrain, you change the light direction, because you can do that with the terrain images as opposed to satellite images, which is a whole different talk, why we can't really manipulate the satellite images. I'm happy to give that another time. But here we can do that. It's software rendered, so we can change the illumination direction. So if you put a southern illumination in the opposite, exactly opposite direction, the ABC appears as a ridge. This is extremely commonly so. And in fact, if you look at the answers from people, the amount of times they can associate a valley with a valley, the level of accuracy with this shaded relief map is about 2.5%. So they can't bypass this illusion. Some people can interpret the terrain in some way, but majority is not able to see this. If it's a valley and if your light is wrong, majority is not able to bypass this. Some people can do it better when you show them in photographic form, whether black and white or in color. We have done this in two because we were interested on the effect of the color as well. So what else is very interesting is this concept called metacognition. It is about being able to assess how well you do in something. So you can do that, you can measure that based on a question of confidence. So people are asked, is that a valley or a ridge, and how sure are you that it's a valley or a ridge? So what is very interesting is this, you see in this graph here, is that the stronger the illusion is, the more confident we are about our answers. And this actually maps. We have been able to show this again and again and again. So if the illusion is strong, you feel that your decision is right, which is very sort of telling in terms of other cognitive biases. Another thing about this study, this is another data set where we had looked at the gender differences, which we always do because in spatial tasks, sometimes there are gender differences. So we looked if there's a difference between men and women in terms of accuracy, there was none. And if we splitted them also by experience, how often they work with satellite images or maps. So we categorize them based on some experience, no experience. And experience sort of does something tiny, but this is not statistically significant, both for men and women. And look at the confidence graph, which is also, I find it super interesting. It's like, this is known in the literature about the confidence difference between men and women as well. So men tend to be overconfident, or people pitch that as underconfident, underconfidence for women. In our case, it's definitely overconfidence for men. But we have first looked at men versus women, and it looked like men were overconfident. But when we split that by expertise, amount of education or experience, you see something that is even more interesting. The less experience they have, the more confident men were. And when they have a little bit more experience, they calibrate their confidence. So the confidence levels are evened with women when men have some experience using these systems. So to me, it's interesting. I don't have full explanation. It's curious how we socialize boys versus girls. I mean, for women, it didn't seem like it matters whether you have some experience or not. For men, it did seem to matter. It's hard to explain since I said I wasn't a social psychologist. I'm sure panel can pick up on these bits. But what is important, I guess I want to take that as a message, is that experience does something, which means that with experience, even if, you know, this in this example is man, but we all have certain biases, right? Whether it's optical illusion, whether it's on other topics. But experience allows you to calibrate your confidence about whether you are so sure that this is the right decision. And I think if this is so, there is some hope that we can actually correct our biases to some degree. At least we can become aware of it. So in essence, by showing these visual illusions, I wanted to tell you that our minds automatically categorize stuff at the operating system level, so silently, not at a rational decision-making level, but it just happens kind of automatically over your lifetime, like shadows and where they belong, or people and where they belong. In this book called Thinking Fast and Slow, I'm sure this audience, especially because you showed up in a gender and diversity panel, might have heard of this. It talks about this very phenomenon with using the words system 1 and system 2. System 1 is when you have this intuitive decision making. You feel like you feel like you know the competence of a person, you feel like you know if this is a value or rich. And system 2 is when you take a deliberate decision, when you put everything on the table, you make your pro-con lists, and you look at the gaps and holes in your logic. And then the book talks about a halo effect about people. So with some people, based on their external qualities, how they look, whether they are tall, whether they are beautiful, whether they have the right name, we might give them some extra credit. We might think that they have certain talent, certain value, certain quality, and then they kind of get a open check that they are good at something, and we keep this effect in our minds and we carry it with us. This can happen based on gender, which is 50% of the population wherever you go, so it's a big deal. It can happen based on race, it can happen based on age, ethnicity, name. I don't have to list this, I think you all understand this. So all kinds of external identities. It's nothing to do with your personality, it is nothing to do with your competence, but stuff that you're born into, stuff that nobody asked you, whether you want to be this gender or that race or something like that. So this kind of thing does makes us put people in certain categories and put them in prior boxes. It has been a useful mechanism for a number of reasons, but it also backfires when we actually end up making the wrong decisions. For the person, it's not fair. For us, we might be losing talent. We might be actually not giving the right person the right task. we might be hiring people for the wrong reasons, as the previous speakers mentioned. I, of course, personally check a lot of these boxes. That may be another reason that I'm here, but sometimes it's also a privilege. I also enjoy a number of privileges that are based on also these things that I didn't earn. And sometimes I probably suffer from it. I don't dwell too much on this part because it's hard to pinpoint when you feel sidelined or excluded. It's hard to pinpoint why. It's hard to pinpoint that it is about gender or it is about race at this point, or it's about something you said or whatever. So it's not easy to pinpoint, therefore I don't really think too much about it. I just go ahead and do my own thing, and sooner or later somebody hopefully picks up on it. But statistics is not in people's, statistics are clear. It's not always on your side that this is only really a fair decision. So one of the things that, another book that I wanted to mention, one of the things is that you have implicit biases. This has been mentioned also earlier. You can in fact go ahead and take a test. Harvard has an implicit bias test. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book called Blink. And in the beginning, there's a lot of very interesting examples of implicit bias. In fact, he starts by saying how he's biased against himself because he rates Black people in a bunch of photos as potentially being more criminal. He himself is in fact a Jamaican Black man. So this is interesting, and this also appears that women do that to other women, and you know, Black people do other Black people. So there's like, if there is some sort of societal hierarchy in your mind, these people who are also at the lower end of the hierarchy pick up on this world order, and they also start sort of treating each other or themselves in this, you know, sense that it's not really in the right in a fair way. So one of the very famous examples of this, and I'm sure many of you know, is draw a scientist test. So you would ask children whether they would draw a scientist. And in 1983, which this number changed a little bit to today, but in 1983, about 5,000 students were drawing scientists, 28 girls out of 5,000, and none of the boys have drawn a female scientist. And this is now, some more modern studies show somewhere in the range of 14% or so of the children draw women as scientists. It happens also in sort of like simple blind tests. So in this one study, they took, this was happening in Germany, they took a bunch of essays written by children. So it's not only children who draw the scientists as women, but teachers do too, I guess in some other way, in some other level. So they took the essays, they changed the names. So you would have the same essay, but with different name on it. And the names sounded either Turkish or German. And if you had a Turkish sounding name, you got much worse grades. Somewhere like starting life at 10 points behind. They had less recommendations. It's the same essay. So it's nothing to do with the content or the quality of the content, but some sort of preconceived notion of carrying this name. Somehow you don't get enough credits. So this is one of the things. The same thing with the name, again, a blind test that was, I think, also a Harvard study, but I'm not sure. It's Heidi versus Howard. Same CV, Heidi Roizen is a real person. They changed it, they changed it to Howard, and one group rated this person's likability, whether they would like to work with this person, whether they would hire this person. And it, of course, Heidi seems like too much out there for herself, and we don't like that Heidi moved the family from one city to another. But Howard is a leader. We like Howard. He has initiative. He makes good decisions, right? So this comes out from progressive pockets. They are grad students or undergrad students in privileged schools in the US. So people who see themselves as egalitarian and progressive, they don't do it on purpose. In fact, if you ask them rationally, they think that they are doing it right, or they think that they are, in fact, they figured this out, but in some subtle testing, they all fail. So we all fail. Same story, one more example. This is more recent. You have a John and Jennifer thing. It's a CV in hiring process. It's in Yale. So both men and women prefer John with the exact same CV. They would hire him and they would pay him more. This is amazing, the differences. I will not go into the detail. And I thought that it's kind of funny to put this headline, fewer women run big companies than man named John. Let that sink in. So not about fewer women than man, but just man named John. So we have, this happens in student evaluations. If you're teaching as a professor, again, blinded studies are possible. So you can do some online teaching where students don't really see the teacher, maybe see the pictures, maybe a lot of communication happens in writing, and then you ask them to evaluate, and the bias shows up again and again and again. So women get evaluated harsher by the students by always some sort of a consistent degree in multiple countries. This just keeps popping up. It happens if you're a TA. This popped up in my Twitter feed just 2 days ago, so I thought that I should include that, whether you're a professor or a TA. It happens in grants. Angelica talked about this earlier, so I won't delve more into it. It happens with invited talks, so men speak twice as often in colloquiums, and this article says that it can't be explained by women's interest in giving talks or by their rank. So something else happens, we don't invite them. It happens with recommendation letters. This is from Geoscience. So we write recommendation letters to our PhD students or postdocs, apparently we write shorter letters for women and we use different words. We highlight talent for men, but we don't do that for women. We highlight diligence and hard work and such. Apparently, this is one of the very interesting, quirky studies. Somebody looked at the space that men, and we literally give men more space. And this is, again, I'm saying we, because it's not just men doing it to men, it's women also doing it to themselves or to men. So apparently in MIT, senior male professors have about 100 square meters more space than senior female professors. And this is not like a dark conspiracy. It's not like, a group of people sitting there and saying, okay, let's give men more space. I mean, they are men, they need more space. It's not a conscious decision. It's just a side effect. It's somehow this unconscious bias at work. And senior female professors have space similar to their junior colleagues. So, I mean, this is like % of my bookmarks. I have so much more I would love to share with you. I think that it's overwhelming and the evidence is there. And if some of the studies were biased or if some of them didn't correct for this or that, it's just so many of them that there's something there. There's something about this unconscious bias. There is something against women in workplace. And this is a recent study, 2020, 9 out of 10, men or women in 75 countries somehow don't think that women are fit for certain things. So there's a very strong prejudice. But is it at all justified? I mean, if this is so strong, if this appears over and over, is it like all wrong? I would say it's a big fat no, it's not justified. If you look at the academic success, women, girls do better in school now. In fact, in every subject, whether it's hard subjects or soft subjects, this is also a conversation. But everywhere in the world, even where you have huge gender equality problems, girls are getting more into universities, somewhere at the moment 56%. This number went 10% in the last 30 years up, and it might continue on. So what can we do as individuals? Obviously, some experience and education helps. We should educate ourselves and maybe others, what we are doing here, but we might be talking to each other by this effort. I don't know. And if you're advising or in a hiring committee or a panel deciding on grants, you are inviting a colleague for a talk, maybe one should reflect. And maybe we should double check if you are fair, and maybe we shouldn't deprive ourselves from competent people for the wrong reasons. And if you're in the job market, I don't know, I guess you should change your name to John. This is harder to say, what the strategies are. I hope that the panel will help. But one thing I wanted to say is that one should not be discouraged. So if you feel sometimes excluded, rejected, or sidelined, maybe it is not about your competence. So try again. Maybe just don't write it off so quickly that, oh, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I can say that other than changing your name to John. So I have only 2 last slides left. These are about more sort of at the institutional level. So this is what we can do at the personal level here. The blind review is an idea. That's the example that actually one of the previous speakers also gave. So in orchestra hirings, introducing a screen helped. So you don't need sort of positive discrimination. You just need to stop the discrimination. So the person doesn't know that it's a man or woman, then they hire more based on talent, and then it corrects to some degree. Maybe it's hard in academia, but it's maybe. And then there's the quotas. I also want to leave that for the panel. So there's a nagging problem with the quotas. It's interesting, maybe it's necessary, but it creates this sense of, is it because of my minority identity that I'm here, or is it despite? So this is not a very, very straightforward solution psychologically, but I suppose it might work. So I'm going to leave you with that. Let's try to remove our illusions. Thank you very much.